Hello, horror fans. Today I will tell you a scary story that will shock you. I warn you, children, stay away from the screens. This story is full of paranormal events.
It had always been a dream of mine, owning a house. A real, honest-to-goodness home, where I could settle down, create memories, and, above all, escape the noise of the world. I wasn't prepared for the inheritance, but when it came, I didn't hesitate. My uncle, the last person I could have ever imagined leaving me anything, had passed away, and with him, the house. It wasn't much in terms of monetary value, but it was mine. Or so I thought. The house sat on the edge of town, isolated and worn. Most people in the area spoke of it with a certain unease. I couldn't say I believed the rumors about the place, not at first. Old houses, especially those in small towns, tend to carry their share of stories that keep people away, stories meant to make the ordinary seem extraordinary. But as I stood in front of it for the first time, feeling the cold bite of the wind, I had this unsettling sense that the house wasn't just old. It was waiting. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, musty, and stale. It smelled like dust, wood, and something else I couldn't quite place. The floors groaned under my weight, and the shadows seemed to cling to the corners. The house, for all its age, felt alive. I could hear it, breathing, shifting, moving in ways I couldn't quite explain. The first night was uneventful. I spent the evening cleaning up, unpacking a few things, and getting familiar with the rooms. There were 6 of them, all of them large, with tall ceilings and narrow windows. The wallpaper was peeling, the paint chipped, and the furniture was old but sturdy. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, yet there were traces of life, footprints in the dust, a book left open on a table, a faint scent of perfume in the air. I tried to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something, or someone, was still there. I settled in for bed, the floorboards above me creaking in a way that reminded me of footsteps. But I convinced myself it was nothing, just the house settling, like they always said. It wasn't until I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, that I heard it. A soft, wet sound. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder. The unmistakable sound of something dripping, slowly. My heart began to race as the noise persisted, echoing through the empty rooms. I got up and walked down the hallway to the source. My feet were bare on the cold wood, each step an agonizing reminder of how alone I was. I reached the room where the sound was coming from, the study. The door was ajar, and as I pushed it open, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There, in the center of the room, was a small puddle on the floor. It wasn't water, it was dark, almost black, and it was spreading. I stared at it for a long time, too terrified to move. How could this be? I hadn't seen anything like it before. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to make sense of it. Was it some sort of leak? A burst pipe? But there was no smell, no dampness in the air, and nothing to indicate a logical explanation. The puddle was thick, viscous, and it seemed to shimmer in the dim light from the flickering bulb overhead. And then I saw it, the thing that would haunt me forever. A figure, barely visible, appeared in the corner of the room. It was tall, too tall, and its form seemed to shift in the shadows. I couldn't make out details, but I knew it was there. Watching. Waiting. It wasn't human. No, it was something far worse. The longer I stared, the more I could feel it moving, breathing, like it was part of the house itself. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in terror, but eventually, I managed to pull myself away and sprint back to my room. I locked the door behind me, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. But it wasn't enough. The sounds of movement outside my door, heavy, deliberate, began again. I curled into a ball under the covers, hoping that somehow, the darkness would shield me. That night, I didn't sleep. The house kept me awake, and I could feel it. It was alive. It was watching me. The walls seemed to shift and bend, like they were breathing along with me. The floors creaked, echoing with every step I didn't take, every inch I didn't move. I felt trapped. There was no escape. The house wasn't just a house, it was a living, breathing thing. And it didn't want me to leave. By morning, I had convinced myself that I had imagined it all. Maybe it was the stress of moving, the isolation. But deep down, I knew. The house was alive, and it had been waiting for me. I didn't know then that I was only scratching the surface. The true terror hadn't even begun. The next few days were a blur. I tried to convince myself that the strange events were nothing more than my mind playing tricks on me: stress, lack of sleep, the overwhelming nature of inheriting an old house all on my own. But every night, without fail, the house came alive again. I couldn't ignore the creaking of the floors, the strange rustling behind the walls, the feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew better. The house was alive. And it was waiting. The noise grew worse, more deliberate. At first, it was a soft, almost inaudible groan, like the sigh of an old man who had been awake for far too long. But soon, it became more than that. The walls seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that set my teeth on edge. The floors buckled, creaked, and cracked underfoot, as though the house was shifting with every step I took. And every night, I heard the same wet, dripping sound from below. One evening, after another restless night, I decided to investigate further. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way down to the basement, where I had noticed the sounds coming from most often. The stairs were steep, creaking under my weight as I descended. The air grew colder as I went deeper, and I could feel the walls pressing in, narrowing the space around me. At the bottom of the stairs, I reached the basement door. The smell was unbearable, damp, decayed, and something else, something sickly sweet. The door was ajar, but I didn't hesitate. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The basement was a cavernous, dimly lit space. Shelves lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs, but what caught my eye was the far corner, where the floor seemed to be moving. The tiles were shifting, buckling and warping like the house itself was alive. And from that corner, the sound of dripping was unmistakable. I couldn't move at first, paralyzed by the sheer strangeness of it all. But then, against my better judgment, I moved closer. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The closer I got to the source of the sound, the more I could feel the air thickening, pressing down on me. The puddle from before was back, larger now, spreading across the floor like some unnatural stain. But it wasn't just a puddle, it was moving, writhing, almost alive. I could see it now. Something was moving in the blackness, slithering beneath the surface of the puddle. Then, from the shadows, I saw it again. The figure. It stood tall and twisted, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its face was obscured by the darkness, but the presence of it, the overwhelming sensation of dread and malice, was enough to freeze me in place. I tried to back away, but my feet were frozen to the floor. The thing was coming closer. I could feel it. It was pulling me in, drawing me toward it with a magnetic force I couldn't resist. The air grew colder still, and I could hear its breath, slow and deliberate. It sounded like a rasp, like something dying, struggling to survive. And then, the walls moved, the entire basement groaned, the sound reverberating through the air as the walls shifted inwards, pressing against me. The floor beneath me buckled again, and I fell, unable to catch myself. I hit the ground hard, my flashlight slipping from my hand, but it didn't matter. The house was alive, and it was trying to swallow me whole. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. But as I turned to run, the door slammed shut. I was trapped. I slammed my fists against it, desperate, but it wouldn't budge. The walls were closing in, inch by inch, their jagged edges scraping against each other. I could hear the thing moving behind me, but I couldn't turn around. I couldn't face it. Not yet. In the midst of the chaos, I heard something else, a voice, soft and whispering, like it was coming from the walls themselves. Get out. I didn't know if it was the house itself speaking or the thing lurking in the shadows, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay here any longer. I forced myself to my feet and, with a final, desperate push, I managed to pry open the door and stumble into the hallway. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, shaking uncontrollably, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The walls didn't just move, they were alive. And whatever was in this house wasn't content to leave me alone. It wanted me. It was trying to drag me down into the dark, into whatever abyss it had come from. The question was, why? I spent the next few days in a haze, not sure what was real anymore. But it was clear to me now, the house was trying to tell me something. It had a history, a dark history, and I was its next chapter. I started digging through the old papers left behind by my uncle, trying to find anything that might explain the house's strange behavior. I found letters, old journals, even newspaper clippings about previous owners who had mysteriously disappeared or gone insane. But the more I read, the more I realized the truth. This house had claimed its previous owners, and now it was coming for me. It wasn't just the walls that moved. It was everything. The house was alive. It's hard to explain the sense of doom that settled over me in those last days. The house wasn't just a place, it was a force, a malevolent entity that had been waiting for something, for someone, and I was the one it had chosen. The walls moved, the floors creaked and groaned, and the thing in the shadows grew more daring with each passing night. It was no longer a figment of my imagination. It was real. And it wasn't going to stop until I was gone. I couldn't escape the feeling that the house had some kind of sentience, a presence that followed me wherever I went. I could feel it in the hallways, in the rooms where I tried to hide. It was everywhere. I would hear the faint whispering of the walls, the scratching of unseen claws beneath the floorboards. But what terrified me the most was that I could feel it watching me. Always watching. Its gaze was like a weight on my chest, a pressure I couldn't escape, and then, one night, it happened. I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, slow. They echoed through the hallway, growing louder with each passing moment. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, as the sound drew closer. It was too late to run. There was nowhere to go. The house had me trapped. The door to my room creaked open. I didn't look at it, didn't move. I could feel it standing there in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the faint light from the hallway. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and I could hear it breathing, slow, ragged, like a dying animal. It was close. Too close. I finally gathered the courage to turn my head, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The thing that had haunted me for so long stood before me. Its body was a twisted, contorted mess of limbs and shadows, its skin pale and slick, like it had been peeled off something long dead. Its face, there was no face. Only a gaping hole where its eyes should have been, its mouth stretched open in a wide, unnatural grin. A grin that seemed to stretch further with every breath it took. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The thing tilted its head, as if it were studying me, savoring my terror. Then, it took a step forward. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the sheer will to survive. But in that moment, I knew I had to do something, anything, to get away from it. I grabbed the closest object within reach, a lamp, and hurled it at the creature. It shattered against the wall, but it didn't flinch. The thing didn't react at all, and then it moved. It was so fast, so impossibly fast, that I barely had time to react before it was on me, its cold, clammy hands wrapping around my throat. The pressure was unbearable, my vision starting to fade as it squeezed. I gasped for air, but it was no use. The thing was stronger than I could have ever imagined. It was feeding off my fear, my panic, and every part of me screamed in my head as I struggled. But then, I remembered the old journal I had found. My uncle's notes. There was a passage that stuck out to me: the house was cursed. It wasn't just a house. It was a trap, a prison for the thing that lived inside it. And the only way to break the curse was to destroy the house itself. With what little strength I had left, I reached for the flashlight that had fallen to the ground. I couldn't see it in the dark, but I could feel it. I gripped it tightly and swung it with all my might. The impact wasn't much, but it was enough. The thing recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for me to gasp in a breath. I pushed against it, rolling to my side and pulling myself off the bed. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The house groaned around me, as if it were alive, reacting to the disturbance. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I made my way to the basement. If the house was alive, if it was truly a trap, then I had to destroy it from a heart. The basement, the source of all the noise, all the terror, it had to be where the curse lived. The stairs were a blur beneath my feet, the cold air suffocating as I descended. I reached the basement door, and it was already open, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped even further. The walls were trembling now, shaking like the house was having a seizure. The shadows were thick, almost tangible, and the thing was still behind me, lurking in the darkness, but I couldn't stop. I knew what I had to do. I ran to the far corner of the basement, where the puddle had been, the same place where it had all started. The black liquid was there, but now it had grown, spreading, crawling, taking over the floor like some monstrous parasite. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a large, rusted pipe, and swung it down into the liquid. The ground beneath me shuddered as if in response. The house screamed. I didn't stop. I kept hitting it, over and over, smashing the pipe into the ground with every ounce of strength I had. The noise grew louder, a deafening cacophony of grinding metal and cracking wood. And then, finally, the house trembled, and the floor beneath me gave way. I fell, everything went black.